Hello and greetings. It's been a little while since we did our last reading. Where were we? Where did we leave off? In the sordid tale. I don't know if it's a sordid tale, but in the tale of Max before and after he went mad in the novelization. It's been really cool reading this. I really do. I really do enjoy reading the novelizations because, again, we just get all this extra stuff. Like last episode, last whatever segment we did, there was that scene that is not in the movie where Jessie and her friend, they're on the way to a birthday party and they're getting stalked, and they're showing that they have some teeth. I believe there's a gun. I don't remember. I got to jog my mind. In any case, they're on their way to a birthday party. They have a scare. That's what it is. It's just a scare. Now I'm remembering. It's a scare, and they're it ends on a light note with them laughing and whatnot. We're up to chapter 11. So this is the after the party, and the Calamine, who is the girlfriend of Jim Goose. That's what's going on. That's who Jessie is palling around with in the previous chapter. So anyway, here is chapter 11. Allow us to continue. The last of the guests had only just left, but already Max and Jessie and Calamine and the Goose were snuggling down in a corner of the lounge room. The debris of the party lay all around them. Jessie had decided that the best way to deal with it was to kill the lights and only leave a candle burning here and there around the room. It was late, and the clear night air carried the rushing sound of cascading waves up the cliff across the veranda and into the room. That really sets the scene. And this sounds like this is another scene that is not in the film. Was this something that George Miller intended to film and it just got cut? Is this part of that 15% that we never got to see? I don't know. If you look out there, you can see the light on the horizon, just the faintest promise of it beginning to creep through the dark, Max said in the gentle tone which he usually only ever used with Jessie. That's what's so nice about this time of morning, Jessie replied. You expect it to get warmer, but instead it gets cooler. And no matter how much you tell yourself that that's what's going to happen, it always surprises you. She gave a laugh, a little surprised by her own sensitivity to the mood. Now, we get that wonderful conversation between Jessie and Max where he talks about walking with his father and the long strides. I guess this is kind of supplants that, maybe, because I don't know, maybe that'll turn up. I don't know. The conversation had launched the Goose off on his own particular road, more to himself than the others. Sitting close in the darkness, he fought to express something. Do you know what it's like on a big bike at this time of morning? It's like nothing else you'll ever know. Everything's so quiet, so still, and there's this almighty, powerful thing waiting to shatter it. The bike's been out there all night, and there's condensation on the chrome as if it's been sweating on you, and it's cold to the touch. So cold. Whoa, this is poetic. Jessie looked up at Max, but his eyes were fixed on the Goose, listening intently to him, trying to pick up the mood that Jim was struggling to capture and convey to his audience. I don't even know what's being captured and conveyed here. You sit on it. Oh, this is great. This is some great innuendo. Ready? You sit on it, and there's a strange feeling in the pit of your stomach as you straddle it. And then you kick it over and it doesn't bite at first. It just rolls through the motions. And then the whole thing works. All the machinery coincides as it was planned to do. And there's a mighty rush through it as it comes to life. And all that peace is gone. There's a roar, which sounds more and more lonely than anything I've ever. Okay, was that not the greatest piece of like unintended like sexual? That totally sounds like he's talking about like a lot of things. Jessie found Max's hand and began to squeeze and stroke it, but he was too wrapped up in the mood Jim was weaving to take any notice. Max is like, yeah, baby. She looked across at Calamine. Her eyes were fixed on Jim's frowning face. Then you wait till it's warm to you. Sort of beat back the darkness. You wind it out. 1,000 cc's of beautiful workmanship, gulping high octane fuel as fast as the carbies can pump it. All going to driving piston, all go to drive pistons, which eventually will drive wheels faster than anything else you've ever seen on the road. It sounds very sexual and very poetic. I love it. I'm loving it. This is amazing. And then there's a clunk as you engage the engine. You gently let the clutch ease out against the pressure of your hand, giving into it until you feel the machine begin to run. It's then that you give it its head running through the gears as fast as your hands and feet can work. And before you know it, you're way out there, howling down the white line. 6 inches below your guts, there are 4 chunks of die-cast aluminum sliding up and down 10,000 times a minute, and there's more power than you ever dreamt you'd know. So he's basically talking about the power of a crotch rocket sitting beneath his, crotch, vibrating, humming, moving, moving quickly. He's whacked out of his mind, Jesse whispered. That's like what Johnny the Boy says. He's whacked right out of his skull, man. He's whacked right out of his mind, Jesse whispered, off his face completely. Max caught her hand. Shh. Honey, Jim is in the middle of sexualizing his motorcycle. Please. Max caught her hand. Shh, honey. Shh. Jim didn't notice. He was miles away, riding his bike into some sort of oblivion. Then you just go a little crazy, a little high. You begin to toy with the idea of screwing the throttle all the way around and just holding it there, letting it eat up the road. On the wide curves, you leaning over so far that the pegs are skimming the asphalt, and you'd imagine that if you look down, there'd be showers of sparks playing around your feet. Before you even know you've done it, you're there. The throttle's open as wide as it can go. Nothing can stop you. There's nothing that means you have to let it come back. Sorry, I'm doing a terrible job of reading this. And you feel I'm getting too into it. And you feel comfortable. You feel strong for doing it. And you start to wonder what it was that made you so afraid in the first place. This is just really sort of existential, almost abstract, like stream of consciousness thought about motorcycles. Jim stopped, lost on the freeway, recapturing for a second that feeling beyond fear. Calamine prompted him to go on. The wind, Jim. What's the wind like? At 140, he said, picking up her cue without noticing that she'd spoken. The wind blast pushes the visor against her face, and it feels like the tip of your nose is being pushed flat. It blasts you down the throat, rasping at your lips and scorching your mouth. Jim fucking Goose, everybody. Jim fucking Goose. That was fucking amazing. That was fucking amazing. Absolutely amazing. I love that. I fucking love that. Scorching your mouth. At that speed, something happens to the way you see and hear. To see anything, you gotta look out. So to see anything at all, you gotta look out past the blur. And you're going so fast. The sound of the wind is so great that you can't hear the motor at all. It's like you're just traveling at this incredible speed and the bike's not there anymore. It's served its purpose. It's got you there and you don't need it anymore. Like you're sitting out all the way ahead of your fear and the noise. And then the feeling grows inside of you, rising up from the pit of your stomach as you that you're as close as you're ever going to be to the edge of losing control. And you want to get closer. You want to go closer. You want to stand with your toes over the edge, but you know that another inch, another second, you'll fall. But it's fascinating. You have to fight with yourself to resist it. Your mind's telling you no, but everything else is saying driving you to it. Jim sat spellbound. Sorry, I'm doing a terrible job of reading this. Jim sat. This is just, it's hard. This is hard to read. This is just so like, I don't even know what's going on right now. Jim sat spellbound, caught up in his own moment on the edge. I mean, this is a filler chapter. This is like fluff. I mean, they're saying the same thing over and over again. Mind you, I'm a long-winded person who says the same thing over and over again. I know this about myself, but this is ridiculous. Calamine looked at him, the love clear as a beacon in her eyes. I've never heard you talk like that before, Jim. Sorry, I'm a little lightheaded right now. She said softly, snuggling herself against his legs. Jim started, I want to see this chapter filmed. I see why this was excised. Jim started to come back to life, a little shocked himself at articulating his thoughts. Jesse was looking at him, trying to understand what it meant. Me too, Jesse, me too. Realizing intuitively that Jim was trying to describe something more than just a feeling on a bike at high speed. You think, Jesse, you think that's what he's talking about? Do you often feel like that, Goose? Are you always like that way when you're on a bike? She asked. Jim looked through the darkness at her, trying to find her face, letting the seconds drag out. No, once or twice, that's all. Never the complete thing. I know there's something more. I've only been 95% of the way. Will you keep trying, Goose? Doesn't it worry you that one mistake and it's all over? That you can only get so close, and if anything goes wrong, you haven't got a chance? Jesse asked. Before Jim could answer, Max cut into the conversation. His voice sounded very deep in the room. I think that's what Jim has been talking about, honey. Not things going wrong, but just going the rest of the way. That last 5%. I think Jim's been talking about dying out there. The terrible attraction it has when you're so close. Jessie felt a shiver rattle through her body. Come on, she said quietly. I think it's time we went to bed. Right. And Jesse, there were rumors that the Toecutter was going to come after them because of the Night Rider. And Jesse knew that. That was in the previous chapter as well, I'm remembering. Okay. Here is chapter 12. I mean, that was one of the most ridiculous chapters. I guess they're trying to foreshadow. They're foreshadowing Jim Goose's death. They're foreshadowing what's going to happen to Jesse. They're foreshadowing the fact that things have been so crazy on the Transcon one that, all of this, violence, all of this insanity, all of this horror business is eventually going to come to a head. Someone's going to, get tragically killed, not on the bad guy side, because that's already happened. That happened to the Night Rider, who had his head taken off. Far more grisly than in the movie. It's just an explosion, but it's far more grisly in the novelization. Again, things are being expressed here that could not be filmed on a $300,000 budget that George Miller had, right? So it's like, of course, they're going to, probably lean into more details from the script. And it's a shame. I wish I had read the script to myself before I had read this, so I could really compare and contrast the novelization and the movie and really sort of overlap on the differences. But, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but didn't. And here we are at chapter 12 and a sip of coffee. Coffee is still too hot to drink. I just burned my mouth, but I'm not going to let it stop me from reading. 3 days had passed, and still Calamine couldn't surrender the memory of Jim's words that night. She tried to recapture the feeling she had as he explained the sense of freedom combined with the high-speed rush to death that he got on the road. I guess literally in that one paragraph basically explained the previous chapter. Like, it didn't even need the previous chapter for that. Whatever. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. He'd gone away the next morning, barreling that high-class, high-powered piece of machinery along the black ribbons crisscrossing the countryside. For once, Calamine didn't allow her jealousy to overcome her. For once, she didn't let her mind wander through the imaginary motel rooms in which she guessed she would find him lying in someone else's arms. And it was ironic because that's just what he's doing. So Goose had a girlfriend that was cut from the movie, but Goose was greasing the wheels the whole time. Because we saw him do the licorice slide in the movie. Her name was Georgie Ramone. Yes, a Ramone. At least that was her stage name, right? So we saw that. So this is what that is. So Georgie Ramone, at least that was her stage name, and he'd met her stranded on a median strip next to her broken down baby blue convertible. He replaced the busted fan belt with one made out of her pantyhose. Woo! And accompanied her to a whistle stop called Sugartown. Oh yeah. She was due to sing that night at the local bar cum cabaret. That's C-U-M cabaret, okay? Which surprisingly enough managed to do a thriving trade with interstate truckies, pickup drivers, and tow truck operators who organized their schedules to catch the late show on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. See, isn't that amazing how that one-off scene that made no sense in the movie is suddenly, so colored, it's so shaded in the novelization. We now know why Jim was there and what he was doing, and that was how he was cheating on his girlfriend with a one-night stand who we never even see in the thing. Jim and Georgie, I guess Georgie, not Georgery. Why am I saying Georgery? Jim and Georgie managed to get it together after the show. Jim and Georgie managed to get it together after the show that night. And for the next 36 hours, Calamine was a million miles from Jim's thoughts. So were the road, the larrikins, and the hoods who inhabited it, and the constant fighting for survival. If Jim had been a little bit more alert, he'd have remembered that there was no such thing as safety, and that a cop's lifespan was in direct proportion to the care he took. He probably wouldn't have died. So we're alluding to the death of Jim Goose. Johnny the boy found Jim's bike parked round back of the seedy motel on the second night. See, they don't even show that in the movie. They just combine that together. While he's in there, they're toying around with his truck, and then we see him the next day. He slept with the girl. It's not important, but we just have more context, I mean, it works fine in the movie. It doesn't really matter, but it's just interesting. I love that. I love the way that they prelude his death like that. And that a cop's lifespan was in direct proportion to the care he took. He probably wouldn't have died that night. Johnny the boy found Jim's bike parked around back of the seedy motel on the second night. Though he didn't know who owned it, he recognized it instantly as a highway patrol superbike, and his twisted mind slipped into a familiar groove. Waiting until nightfall, he drifted through the darkness and settled down on his knees next to the rear wheel. Deftly, he pulled a spanner from the pocket of his leather jacket. I don't know what a spanner is. It's probably like a ratchet, and fitted it around the rear wheel nut. Straining his forearm and bicep, he exerted all his strength against the arm of the spanner until he felt the nut begin to release itself from the thread. Carefully, he spun it out using his own extensive experience of repairing bikes to guess the exact point where the nut was loose enough to finally shear off, but not so loose that the rider would notice his rear wheel wobbling. It was over in a matter of seconds, and Johnny disappeared into the night, only regretting that he probably wouldn't be there to witness the result of his handiwork. Jim the Goose roused himself from sleep early the next morning. He bent over to take a long, lingering look at Georgie, stretched out next to him, and decided against waking her. Quietly, he rose and slipped into his uniform, cursing once again the black leathers with which regulation and common sense demanded he wear. So he doesn't want to wear those. Turning again to Georgie, he patted her gently on the thigh, stretched down, kissed her on the neck, and then slipped out the door. It was a magic morning. So that's what the chapter was. It was to foreshadow Jim's death. We barely get any characterization from Jim Goose. He's such in the book at least, he is so Steve Bisley, who played Bisley, gives him so much character in the movie. He brings the character to life. In here, he's like nothing. I mean, none of the characters really are. It was a magic moment. The air as clear and as clean as sunlight, just a gentle breeze whispering across the sound fields. I could totally picture this in my head, though. Jim breathed deeply, and a broad smile cracked his face. Bouncing his helmet in his hand, he ambled towards his bike and swung his leg over the saddle. He brushed his long hair out of his eyes and swept it back onto his forehead before pulling his full face helmet over his head. He clipped the visor into the up position and grabbed the cycle by the hand grips, pulling it back off its stand and walked it into the middle of the yard. Couldn't we just have, hey, he hopped on his bike and drove out and then saved the rest of that for something that's more important? He bent to one side, opened the choke, twisted the ignition. We just got a whole chapter about this shit. He bent to one side, opened the choke, twisted the ignition key, and rolled the throttle into his hand. The motor exploded into life, waves of heat flaring out through the quadruple exhausts, shattering the calm of the morning. One of those who's disturbed by the one of those who was disturbed by the rasping roar of the motor was Johnny the boy. He leapt from his bed on the other side of the motel. So he woke up, he was still there, and reached out his window in time to see that Jim scrape his pegs onto the rim of the road as he took to the highway. So he sees Jim going out for his on his bike ride. The bike boomed over the first crest, with Jim flattening himself along the fuel tank and winding the accelerator out. Faster and faster, he roared down the long downhill section and into the gully and up the other side of the hill. Beneath him, the roar was being eaten up at an alarm. Beneath him, the road was being eaten up at an alarming speed. A grin began to hover around the corners of his mouth as he watched the needles on the Speedo and the taco. It's like nacho, but with a T. Tacho. The Speedo and the Tacho swing almost in unison round the pretty little circles in front of him. Over the next crest, into a long series of sweeping curves, laying the bike over and feeling himself suspended like a fly on the wall. Didn't say that right. Over the next crest, into a long series of sweeping curves, no, I did say that right. It's just an incomplete sentence. And feeling himself suspended like a fly on the wall. As the needle crept towards 120 miles an hour, he felt inside himself the surge, which he had described to Columbine. Ooh, foreshadowing. So very, very long ago now, it seemed, he was going close to the edge, always closer to the edge. When it happened, laying it hard on that. He was going close to the edge, always closer to the edge when it happened. Laying it hard on a corner when the nut finally sheared off the nut. Yeah. No, but this, I mean, we see this in the movie. We know he's tinkering with the bike, and then all of a sudden something happens, his brakes. It's not described in this manner, though, but that's why it took so long for him to fly off his bike. The back wheel locked and then freed itself. The back, oh my God, I can't read today. The back wheel locked, then freed itself, rupturing the rest of the delicate machinery and totally destroying the delicate balance between man, machine, and the road. That used delicate twice there, pal. The bike hurtled off the bitumen, and Jim's overwhelming feeling before, God, I'm so sorry. I just want to apologize to whoever is struggling to listen to this reading. If you are reading the novelization, I just don't have it today, and it's not smooth, and I apologize. I deeply apologize for that. Let me take one moment to recalibrate. Okay, we're gonna do it. The bike damn it. The bike hurtled off the bitumen, and Jim's overwhelming feeling before the panic caught him was of absolute confusion. His mind could not compute what was happening. Only when he'd overcome the hurdle and realized that it didn't matter why it was happening. The salient point was that he was about to die. The terror rushed out from his stomach and smothered his mind. He was sailing through the air, miraculously, still on the bike. He had thought of it. He probably would have laughed to think that at last he was well and truly over the edge. In the clear morning light, the bike and Jim the goose hit the scrub. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. In the clear morning light, the bike and Jim the goose hit the scrub at better part than 100 miles an hour. The front wheel touched first, bit into the dirt, and caused the back to cartwheel over the top. Jim was still in the saddle as the bike tumbled and rolled across the scrub, bits and pieces of it spraying out in its wake. Gradually, the continuing impact ate up its momentum. The dust settled and the silence returned to embrace the morning. Only the wind rustled gently across the barren country. Minutes passed. No other traffic moved onto the road, and the bike lay crumpled and shattered in the dirt. And Jim, 10 yards away, gingerly tried to move his hand. Then that he should have survived at all was incredible. That he survived more or less intact was nothing short of a miracle. His leathers were ripped to shreds, revealing ugly dirt burns on his shoulders, thighs, and back, and legs, but his helmet had saved his face and head, and his boots had provided enough support to his ankles to prevent them from snapping. The fairing, which had surrounded the bike, had absorbed most of the initial impact, which left when it left the road. Though it was eventually ripped off, the bike's fury had been tamed by the time Jim's leather-clad body had started to absorb the punishment. He had an ugly gash on his neck at the base of his helmet, and he could feel the warm trickles coursing its way down into the collar of his jacket. Groggily, he staggered to his feet, flexing and feeling his limbs and muscles to check the damage. Any moment, he expected pain to start slashing through his body from broken bone or internal injury. That was a very well-written paragraph. He found breathing difficult, but guessed correctly that he had badly bruised his chest. He pulled his helmet off his head without noticing that the visor had been torn from its hinges and stripped out of his jacket. He walked unsteadily towards the bike, barely recognizable in its crumpled state, and searched for a rear view mirror in which to examine the extent and depth of the gash. It was a pointless exercise. The mirrors lay in the scrub about 100 yards away, ripped from their stands at initial impact. Jim looked down at the bike, marveling at the damage and trying to understand how he could have gone over the high side and emerged in one piece. Dressed in nothing more than his riding boots and what was left of his leather pants, clutching the battered helmet in his hand, he walked back towards the road. Halfway there, and after several stops to examine the debris of his machine, Jim began to laugh. Though there was an edge of hysteria to them, they were deep, rolling belly laughs. "I'm alive," he yelled to the world. "Over the edge and back again. Who'd believe it? I asked you. Who'd believe it? It must be a miracle." And it was a strange, wasted miracle, because Jim the Goose would be dead within another 8 hours. Johnny the boy was sitting in the local cafe when he saw a battered Jim alight from a light from the pickup he had finally managed to flag down. We see that in the movie. We don't see Johnny stalking him, though. Johnny was astonished that the cop had survived. He was furious that his little game had not worked to plan. The Toecutter and Bubba Zanetti were due to meet him within a couple of hours. The account of tampering with the cop bike, which he had rehearsed, hoping it would win their approval, was now less than worthless. Because again, and that explains why Johnny the boy sets him on fire in the movie. This is an initiation. He's being initiated, and that's why he has to do it. He's being initiated into the Toecutter gang. As he sat, killing the hours in the diner, he even hoped that the Toecutter and Bubba would see the wreckage on the side of the road as they traveled to meet him. He imagined himself letting them give their account to what it had looked like, and then modestly telling him of his work the night before. But somehow the damned cop had managed to come back alive. Johnny hated him for that. Hated him now with a passion which totally preoccupied his tiny mind. He realized that if Jim was going to pay for his effrontery in surviving the sabotage attempt, he'd need the help of the Toecutter and Zanetti. He realized that if he told them the story, he could win their support. He might not win the respect and admiration he had hoped for, but he knew that they would accept the challenge of wasting this seemingly indestructible cop. Jim didn't even notice Johnny watching him as he walked past the front of the diner, turned the corner, and headed into the service station. When he was threatening and cajoling the owner into loaning him his pickup, the Toecutter and Bubba Zanetti roared into town and joined Johnny at his table in the cafe. Quickly, Johnny explained what had happened, talking in a soft, low voice, and barely noticing the anger lacing his words. As he'd anticipated, the Toecutter took Jim's survival as a front to honor an ability of one of his lieutenants and immediately began to plot the cop's destruction. Okay, so I guess Johnny's a lieutenant. I thought this was like an initiation. In mid-sentence, Bubba Zanetti gripped his arm as the Toecutter was about to backhand him across the face to make the point that nobody interrupts the leader. Zanetti pointed out the window. "Is that him, Johnny? At the wheel of the pickup? Quick." Johnny scrambled to his feet and ran to the front of the cafe. He caught sight of Jim's profile as he trundled out of the town. He ran back to rejoin the Toecutter and Zanetti. "Yeah, that's him. He must have gotten the pickup from the service station." I think we should pay him. I think we should pay the owner a little visit," the Toecutter said. "He'll probably be able to tell us what our friend intends to do. Minutes later, they emerged from the office attached to the gas station, carrying with them the information that Jim had borrowed the truck to pick up the remains of his bike from a paddock about 15 miles north. We really don't need all this plotting. We don't. Like, I get it. I appreciate it. I see why George Miller cut that. It was just unnecessary. Briefly, the Toecutter outlined his plan to the other two as they walked towards their bikes. Whatever they thought of the idea, it didn't show on their faces. They'd learned a long time ago that while the Toecutter was the leader, his word that while the Toecutter was leader, his word was law. They were his faithful troops. It was not their place to question his orders. Riding calmly out of town, they picked up the 4-lane superhighway and headed off to the tail of the pickup. It was obvious from the Toecutter's plan of action that they had plenty of time. They would meet Jim the Goose on their own terms. They fell into an easy riding pattern, the Toecutter in the front and the other two forming the arms of a V behind him. 10 miles out, they found the place the Toecutter was looking for. With a wave of his hand, he led them off the highway and up the exit ramp and onto the concrete overpass straddling the highway. They left their bikes parked in the middle of the road and walked to the steel balustrade, standing there together about 20 feet above the highway. They could see for at least 5 miles in the direction Jim would come. "This is perfect," the Toecutter said after scanning the bridge and viewing down the road. "Now you're going to be the one that has to do it, Johnny. This is your cup. You sure you got it clear in your head?" "Sure, Toecutter. I'll just wait until he's under and then pow!" "Make sure you allow for the speed he's traveling. I bet he'll be barreling along. If you get too early or too late, it will be wasted." "Yeah, I know, boss. I gotta time it right." "Okay, get in position. Bubba and I." Ooh, that hurts my voice. "Okay, get in position. Bubba and I'll wait up here out of sight, but we'll be watching for him. And Johnny, one more thing. The Toecutter expects you to see..." So is that Bubba Zanetti? No, that's the Toecutter talking about himself in third person. "Okay, get into position. Bubba and I'll wait up here out of sight, but we'll be watching for him. And Johnny, one more thing. The Toecutter expects you to succeed. He demands it even." "Yeah, don't worry. He's good as dead." With that, Johnny climbed over the bridge rail and stretched himself along the narrow cement parapet, the road almost directly beneath him. "Okay, Bubba, hand it down to me." Bubba Zanetti walked to the edge of the rail, leant over it, and handed a heavy-duty steel brake drum to Johnny. "Be careful, it weighs a ton." Johnny took it, lowering it gently to rest on the parapet. I like that word, parapet, in front of him, and moved his fingers round the rim until it felt comfortable in his grasp. The minutes slipped into the first one, then 2, and finally 3/4 of an hour. Except for a couple of road rigs and fast cars, the highway was deserted. Then, in the distance, they heard the throaty growl of a powerful engine being worked to capacity. The 3 men shook off their lethargy and tensed themselves, straining their eyes as the speck which had come into view. Gradually they made, oh my God. The 3 men shook off their lethargy and tensed themselves, straining their eyes at the speck which had come into view. Gradually, they made out the distinctive shape of a pickup traveling close to the ton. "This'll be him, Johnny," the Toecutter called out. "Don't be too anxious, boy." Johnny didn't reply. His gaze was fixed steadily on the steadily growing shape. It was traveling very, very fast, and Johnny knew that there was no room for miscalculation. He had the brake drum clenched in his hand, balanced on the very edge of the ledge. Jim didn't notice the prone figure hugging the side of the road bridge above him. The first he knew of Johnny the boy's existence was when, Jim the Goose didn't know the prone figure hugging the side of the road bridge above him. The first he knew of Johnny the boy's existence was when the brake drum dropped from 20 feet above. shattered its way through his windscreen. Jim's immediate reaction was to shield his eyes from the glass exploding and lacerating his face. The pickup swung out of control, narrowly missing the concrete stanchions on the far side of the bridge, careered across 3 lanes, rode across the shoulder of the highway, through a guardrail, and shed the mangled bike. Fuck me, dude. The pickup swung out of control, narrowly missing the concrete stanchions on the far side of the bridge, careered across 3 lanes, rode across the shoulder of the highway, through a guardrail, and shed the mangled bike from the tray at the back. The pickup continued its wild slide across the scrub, hitting a ditch, rolled, and came to rest upside down. Although the truck was a smoking, shuddering wreck, Jim, suspended upside down in the cabin, was relatively unharmed. One leg was pinned by the steering column. His face was streaming blood, and he had no feeling in his left hand, but he was conscious, and his eyes escaped all damage. He could smell the strong reek of petrol as the ruptured tank spilled its contents on the scrub. But the thing which concerned him most was whether anyone would notice him from the road. Having survived the crash, he didn't particularly want to die of thirst because nobody knew he was down there. He tried to prise his leg free, but it was hopeless. With his left arm out of action and throbbing with pain now, there was little chance of him being able to force the steering column into a position where he could wriggle his legs out. Jim was still struggling to free his leg when the 3 bikies reached the wreck. They watched the results of Johnny's perfect aim with mounting satisfaction. The pickup wheels were still spinning as they scrambled down the slight incline after it, kicking up a storm of dust behind them and sending tiny avalanches of gravel down in the front. Jim saw them when they were almost upon him, and his instant reaction was one of relief. He had been found so quickly he could hardly believe his luck. It was only when he called out to them for help and received no reply that the first twinges of anxiety began to pluck at him. His mind skipped over the details of their dress, which instantly identified them as rebels of the road. That is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying, actually. The Toecutter walked slowly to his window and peered at him. "Give us a hand, will you? All I need is some pressure on the steering column here, and I'll be able to get my leg out." The Toecutter didn't bother to look at where Jim's leg was pinned. His eyes were riveted on Jim's face. The goose was uneasy now. He tried to keep talking. "Smash my windscreen. Damn silly thing to do. It wasn't even my pickup." Still, the Toecutter didn't say a word. "My second write-off today," he said, with an attempt at a laugh. "I rode off my bike this morning." The Toecutter just stared, and then, almost spitting out the words, he said, "I know. You should have died that first time and saved us a lot of trouble." Jim looked at him. Realization began to dawn. The bike, he thought. Somebody tampered with the bike. He would have cursed his own carelessness and stupidity if the waves of terror hadn't started to swell up in the pit of his stomach. This is pretty good. As the Toecutter turned to walk away, Jim noticed for the first time a tiny tattoo on his cheek. Hey, you ain't going to leave me here," he yelled. The Toecutter turned in his tracks. "No, not just yet." Out of sight, Jim heard 2 men laugh. Slowly, the Toecutter began to walk around the wreck, examining its every detail as he slowly rolled a cigarette between his thumb and his forefinger. Slowly, he came... it's a lot of slowies. Slowly, he came round to the back of the wreck, where Johnny and Bubba were waiting for him. Nobody spoke. The stench of petrol was filling the air. They could hear the muffled yells of Jim, the goose, but none of them paid any attention. The Toecutter licked the end of his cigarette, placed it between his lips, and thrust his hands into his pockets. "Light me, Johnny." Johnny the boy dug through his pockets for some matches, finding them, and struck one and held it to the Toecutter's dangling cigarette. The Toecutter inhaled deeply, took the cigarette from his mouth, and blew a cloud of smoke over his 2 troopers. "Now the wreck, Johnny." He doesn't say that in the movie. Johnny didn't understand. He couldn't discover in his head what the Toecutter meant. "The wreck? The wreck?" he asked. "That's right, Johnny. Light the wreck. Just walk around and throw a match on the gasoline." and then we can leave here. The Toecutter was speaking in a little more than a whisper, and Jim couldn't distinguish the words. Bubba Zanetti was looking at the two of them, wondering if Johnny would have the guts to do it or the courage to say no. You don't mean that, Toecutter, and realized that it sounded too much like an order, followed with a question. Do you? Of course I mean it, Johnny, and you've got to do it. This was your cop. Remember that. We only came to help. This is your score. But that was different, Toecutter. Not a helpless guy trapped in a wreck. I mean, Christ, let's leave him here. We don't have to set him on fire. What's the difference, Johnny, between unscrewing somebody's wheel so he'll smash himself to death and throwing a match on the grass? Johnny looked at him. He was at a loss to explain it. In an instant, the Toecutter had him by the throat. I'll tell you what the difference is, Johnny. The difference is courage. Any fool can tamper with someone's bike. Any fool can undo the nuts or cut into the brake cables. But it takes a special sort of person to kill someone face to face. The Toecutter was hammering the words into Johnny from less than a couple of inches away. Walk around the wreck, look into the window, and show the cop the package of matches. He'll know what you mean. And then watch the terror in his eyes. Do it, Johnny, and don't ever forget the look on his face, because someday someone will see it on you, which is very true. Johnny's voice trailed off as he saw absolute disgust written all over the Toecutter's face. You're at a threshold, Johnny, and it looks like you'll be found wanting. Inside the cab, the Goose heard enough to know that some sort of argument had developed, and he was using the diversion to frantically try and free himself, but his leg was pinned fast, and he already expended most of his strength in the struggle. You want to be with us, don't you, Johnny? You want to be one of the chosen few, don't you? You want to be an acolyte, don't you? The Toecutter's voice had risen at every question, and he finished by screaming in Johnny's face. Sweet Jesus, not like this, Johnny cried, and stepped back a pace or two. I hate the pain. They say I was a sickly kid. They were always giving me needles. Oh, God, I hated the pain. The Toecutter looked at him with contempt and turned away from him and said one word. Bubba! Zanetti was at his side in a second, but the order had been enough to snap Johnny out of his memories. It's okay, Tota. Tota. It's okay, Toecutter. I'm all right. The Toecutter looked at his face, glistening with sweat. He's the bronze, Johnny. He keeps you from being free. You do want to be free, don't you, Johnny? The boy nodded his head, beaten now into submission. Remember the Knight Rider, Johnny, he said, treating him like a child. You liked the Knight Rider, didn't you? The Toecutter knew he had him. Go, light him, Johnny. Not for you, not even for me, but for the Toecutter. The Toecutter pushed him toward, I fucked up the line. The Toecutter knew he had him. Go and light him, Johnny. Not for you, not even for me, but for the Knight Rider. The Toecutter pushed him towards the wreck, where Jim was making one last frantic effort to free himself. He had already vomited once, half from the pain and half from the fear, and there were trickles of saliva coursing down his chin. He was fighting with his leg, trying to rip it from its prison, wishing that he could cut it off, do anything to escape from what horror was being planned for him. Go on, Johnny, do it! Johnny stumbled towards the wreck, slowly pulling a match from the box and spilling another half dozen onto the ground. He had the match in one hand, the box in the other, and was standing at the edge of the ring of petrol when the Toecutter ordered him to stop. For a second, a feeling of relief swept across him. It vanished with the Toecutter's next order. Look at his face first, Johnny. You gotta see it in his eyes, or there's no point. You gotta learn that, Johnny. Johnny turned to look at the Toecutter and Bubba, silently pleading to be allowed not to have to do it, but he got no sympathy there. Holding the match and the box rigid in his hand, he walked through the gasoline and approached the driver's side door at an angle from behind. Jim saw him first when his face was at the window. He turned and saw the wild eyes and the sweat-stained cheeks. He was about to scream at the kid, demanding that he help him, when he was struck by the tortured expression on his face. That second of hesitation gave Johnny the chance to raise his two hands to the window, and there, clenched in white knuckles, inches away from Jim's face, was the method of his execution. Before Jim could scream at him to stop, Johnny the boy was gone, turning from the window of the wreck and using all of his strength to scratch the match along the side of the box. He felt it flare in his hand. He dropped it, barely noticing the flames that licked at his boots and leather-clad legs as he stumbled back towards the Toecutter and Bubba Zanetti. The fire roared across the scrub and, reaching the pools of petrol alongside of the wreck, exploded into an orange inferno. Jim screamed his lungs out just as the flames reached him. The next breath he took was almost pure fire. It ripped through his lips, down his throat, and ended forever any chance of his breathing again. Damn, that is fucking crazy. The Toecutter grabbed Johnny by the shoulders and swung him around to look at his handiwork. Did you look into his eyes? Did you see death there? Johnny couldn't answer. He stared unseeingly at the flames, the scream bouncing again and again off the walls of his mind, and every time it swelled in volume, until, in an agony of sound, he clasped his hands to his head and begged it to stop. The Toecutter ripped his hands from his ears. It's over, Johnny. You did it. You'll never forget it. You'll never forget his face. Bubba put a hand on the Toecutter's shoulder. Someone's coming down the road. I can hear them. Someone's coming down the road. I can hear them. The Toecutter slapped Johnny across the face and let it The Toecutter slapped Johnny across the face and led the scramble up the hill to their bikes. Hurriedly, they mounted, pulled the machines off their stands, and punched the ignition keys into the locks. With a burst of power, they sped away from the blaze. But, try as he might, Johnny just couldn't get the scream out of his head. Woo! What a friggin' chapter, man. Again, I want to apologize for being so marble-mouthed today and remind you that our sponsor is riotstickers.com. That's right, Riot Stickers. That's the place to get stickers for all of your stickering needs. You can there's a special deal with Riot Stickers right now that we are hosting on the Frumess channel. For $79, you can get 1,000 stickers. Okay, that's a really good deal. That's 7 cents per sticker. You can't find a better deal than that. The stickers are printed on vinyl, which makes them waterproof, right? They have a UV protective coating, which protects them from the sun, keeps those reds nice and fresh. And you just can't go wrong, man. The link is down in the description. It's riotstickers.com/Frumess. That's FRUMESS. We'll see you next time and see what the fallout is from Jim the Goose. We kind of know. It was very interesting. It was very different from the movie, or a lot of differences from the movie. They're tiny differences. The differences that don't really matter, but it's still fun to see. Let's play it out with the Riot Stickers video, and we will see you next time.